All right, welcome everyone to our first official office hours, responding to recovery needs through an equitable school schedule. We're really excited to have you here, and we are thrilled to talk about this very exciting topic today. Please introduce yourselves, share your name, role, and school district in the chat. And that way we can know who's here and we can get started. A few of the webinar features that we're going to have going today. So we just wanted to make sure that everybody was on the same page. We're going to use the Q&A feature to ask questions. So if you have any questions, please make sure to put them there. But you can also use a chat. If you have any comments or thoughts or questions, we want to hear from you. We are new to the webinar platform, so bear with us as we learn. We're going to introduce ourselves in just a minute. So I am Sarah Sandelius. I am the founder of the Ability Challenge, and I started this work as a lawyer, came to education through that lens, and I've spent over 15 years working in school districts and in other partnerships where I've focused on sort of the intersection of law and policy and special education, which is why when I decided to start the Ability Challenge, it was only natural that was where our focus is. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about who we are and what we do, but first I'm going to turn it over to Kristen to introduce herself as well.
Hi, I am Kristen Briggs. I'm the Managing Director of Program here at ABC. We are thrilled to have you all with us this afternoon to talk about schedules. I joined the work, I started my career as a special education teacher. I taught high school English and then moved through school leadership. I've been a school leader K-8, all in the realm of special education. I've done district level leadership in special education. Then my career took a pivot. I went into nonprofit to kind of spread the special education love and knowledge far and wide with implementing high quality curriculum. And so it's been really nice to have a full circle moment with ABC to be able to connect my passion for special education with this nonprofit sector and really supporting schools and districts. I know this work very well, and so it is really fun to be able to work with partners.
Thanks. So I'm going to transition to a brief overview of the Ability Challenge. And we would love to engage if anyone's interested in talking to us more about what we do or how we approach the work. We're happy to talk through it. So we partner with districts and schools and states up and down the East Coast, including in DC, Maryland, and Vermont. Our work really centers around putting students that are the most marginalized and diverse learners at the center of school improvement initiatives. And so we focus on special education improvement, but we take this very general, broad lens of what is special education. And so we use a research-based approach to develop core competencies in school leaders, educators, and support staff members. And in turn, they are then empowered to create an authentically inclusive school community and a team that works together to meet the unique needs of all learners, as the slide says, to transform how students with disabilities are served in their school. So if we had to sum it all up in a brief sentence, we take the approach of the student with a disability and all of the things that they're experiencing in their day and in their year at school. And we want to make sure that schools are designed to effectively serve and meet the needs of those students, because we believe that if we can meet the needs of those students, we can actually meet the needs of all students. And so that is really at the center and the core of our work. So the reason why we are starting this series is because over the last few years, we've been issuing blog posts and tools on occasion on a semi-regular basis, but we really wanted to hone the work that we were doing and align those tools with what we were learning in the field. So we looked at two things that were happening. Number one, we're in a period of growth, and this is so exciting for us, and we're learning so much from all of our work. And at the same time, COVID and recovery efforts are really showing that there's a need for more support in schools and districts in this area. And so the hope is that by offering these office hours, that we are aligning our lessons with the creation of practical action-driven tools that schools actually need. And I want to reiterate that we are focusing on practical action-driven tools because we really see that there are a lot of tools out there, but there is a unique opportunity to fill a gap in creation of tools that can be used right away and sort of translated into the field with the very real context that we know that you're all facing right now. And so how we're approaching this is that we sort of have three components. One is share the lesson. So every month we're identifying an insight that we are blogging about, and then creating and offering a tool for the field that helps to put those lessons into practice. And then finally having these office hours sessions or webinars so that we can provide a platform to engage with the network of folks in our community about the tool and about the issue. So we're really hoping that this can be a model that we can follow for the year. And we're excited about having this one be our first one. So why schedules? Over the past few months, we've seen that school schedules have emerged as a really hot topic among partners and members of our community for a number of reasons. First of all, they're seeing an increased need for supports and additional supports to manage student behaviors and academic performance. Some of this is related to COVID and COVID recovery. Some of this, I'm sure we don't know what it's related to until we are a few years looking back, seeing what the trends were. But really, a lot of folks in our network have expressed to us this need for support in like the intervention space. The other thing that's happening is that with the increased need for intervention, there's also demands for educator collaboration, which tends to not be getting the same attention that it needs. So as you think about providing supports, multidimensional supports and supports in different ways to students who are struggling or students in need of additional support, you need to make sure that you're doing it with a whole school approach so that everybody's on the same page and there's some consistency in how those interventions are done. Hence why you need collaboration. But oftentimes what we're seeing is that moments for collaboration are being used to deal with very real operational needs, health and safety needs, or just logistics. And so we see there is an increased need for focus on how educators are communicating with each other. And then lastly, as you may know, school schedules are stretched thin because of staffing shortages. And this is a unique one that we're seeing more and more this year. And I think we're going to continue to see for some years to come. And it's a tricky one because the folks that are left in the school building are left to stand up all of the programming and support students who are struggling as well. And so this is a really big challenge. I always say that school, the most scarce resource in schools right now is educator time and attention. And so when you think about it that way, and you think about the way that schedules are built, the good news is there is an opportunity to leverage schedules to try to build some efficiencies. And so we see that as a real opportunity for reimagining the way that schools are designed to address some of the challenges that our educators are facing right now. So we're going to talk more about what the lessons we've learned, but this is just giving you a background on why we are addressing this topic today. Take it away, Kristen.
Cool. So as Sarah outlined for us, this is really coming out of what we're seeing in our work with partners and what's just coming up in our communities. So we've said about the first step in our knowledge sharing process, we wrote about it. So if you are with us today, or if you are watching this on playback, most likely you have read our blog on school schedules. As an organization, we also believe wholeheartedly in living our learning and want to take a minute to name a real-time example of that. You may have noticed a language change in the title of this office hour from when the blog first went live. That was purposeful. A member of our community called us in with care and highlighted the harmful roots of language such as master schedule. Understanding that impact is greater than intent, we made the immediate step to adjust the language, and we believe strongly in sharing that learning with others. Throughout this session, you'll hear us using the term whole school schedules. In the blog, we outlined 3 guiding principles for creating your school schedule. The guiding principles apply whether you are a school leader thinking of your K-5 or middle school or high school, or if you're a district level administrator thinking of district-wide scheduling needs. So first, data is your best friend. And we have a little asterisk here. We know in education, when you hear data, we tend to think in numbers and figures. For us, when we think about data in this context, we're thinking really like qualitative things. So we're saying, what are your priorities and non-negotiables? We'll talk more about this when we go into the tool in a moment, but this is a guiding principle everyone should have in mind when you start your schedule, is getting really clear on your non-negotiables. You'll thank us later. Next, special education cannot be an afterthought. Sarah outlined this when she was talking about ABC's approach, and that is definitely felt through our thinking when it comes to creating a master schedule. You want to make sure that you're beginning with your most marginalized students. The reality is, starting your process there allows you to set a foundation to ensure those students' needs are met, and you're then able to be even more strategic about things such as staffing allocations, collaboration opportunities, etc. This last one, if I could put it on a t-shirt, I would. I just might figure out a way to do it. Draft, review, revise, repeat. Scheduling is an iterative process. I had someone tell me the first time I was doing a school-wide schedule, you know, if you get it on the first try, great, but do not be upset if you don't. It happens. So be kind to yourself, be patient, and know that once you have your non-negotiables locked in, it is going to iterate. It's showing that you are being nimble and that you're really trying to make sure that you're being responsive. So we recognize that having guiding principles is only a part of it, right? It's all about how you actually can put this into action. And so that informed the next step, which was developing that tool that schools and districts can actually use to put these principles into practice. Aligned with that first guiding principle of data is your best friend, the first step with this tool is a data collection brainstorm. So this is where you think about all of the pieces of information that you need to account for when you create your schedule. Do you have curriculum requirements? Are you doing balanced literacy? Does your school have block scheduling? These are all pieces of information that may seem like unspoken understandings. Putting them down on paper is makes a huge difference in how strategic you can really be with your schedule. See all the pieces laid out in front of you. I come from a high school background. We needed to know our credit accrual information. We needed to know how many sections of world history do we actually need? How many sections of earth science do we need to account for based on our student credits? Those are all pieces of information to collect at the front end. And Sarah, I think we just had a question come through. This is the fun part of navigating Zoom and getting all of your windows in order. Okay. How do you know when data is too much? So that's honestly a question that your school will need to answer. Also, please keep the questions coming. We have time at the end for them as well, but feel free to keep dropping them in the Q&A box or in the chat. How much data is too much data is something that your school will absolutely be able to answer. It is definitely connected to the priority and non-negotiable question, because if everything's a priority, nothing is a priority. So I'm going to move us into that next section and come back to this question. If I don't answer it though, please ask a follow-up. So this is the second part of the data is your best friend, and that is now prioritizing. You have all of this information, wonderful. We might even know how many, we need 7 sections of world history, or we have students who want to take an AP course or what have you. But how do we now determine like what our non-negotiables are that we cannot and will not budge on as a school? This is where you set them. So an example we have here is a school might have a goal for the year of like strengthening tier 1 instruction by implementing a literacy curriculum. If that is our non-negotiable, like we are implementing this new curriculum, and that curriculum determines that we actually need to have a 90-minute chunk of time for our literacy block, that's not moving. Now, maybe we're crafty with 45 minutes here and 45 minutes there, or what have you, but we know no matter what, we are not compromising on having that chunk of time for implementing our literacy block. Are you launching any new initiatives? Something else that's really important to name here on non-negotiables, do you have teacher contracts that you need to adhere to, right? If your teachers are guaranteed a planning period, you want to make sure that you're not setting up a master schedule that has a teacher teaching for 3 blocks straight without actually getting their planning period. So this is where you write out all of your non-negotiables, and that should help you answer the how much data is too much data question. Another thing to consider with your priorities and non-negotiables, especially in the context of recovery efforts, intervention blocks. If you know going in that your school or district wants to implement an intervention block initiative, actually map that out in your non-negotiables, okay? Because as you start to put pen to paper and build out your schedule, you wanna know that you've accounted for that block and you don't find yourself having to go back and retrofit an intervention block in your school schedule.
And I want to add also, just to jump in for a minute, Kristen, I think what you said earlier is really important to underscore, which is you may need to make some decisions here because you don't want to have 45 non-negotiables. These are the priorities, like what is feasible and manageable. And you might have to make the hard decisions to say, you know what, we're not going to do that this year. We're going to focus on these 3 things. But that's like one of those things that if you are doing this exercise with a leadership team, or you're doing it as, the sole school leader, getting really clear on how the vision is driving the work is absolutely relevant to how your schedule looks.
Yes. So you have your data, you know what your non-negotiables are, you have your priorities, we're ready to go. We get to the next phase of the tool. This is aligned to that second guiding principle, and that is that special education cannot be an afterthought. You want to consider how you're going to address specific components of your special education program and how to account for that in your schedule. So we give you some factors and questions to consider in that tool. One thing we want to name, this is not an exhaustive list of considerations. And on the flip side of that coin, these are things for you to consider. If your school or district is in a place where you are just exploring a continuum, or where you have certain regulations or requirements for your related services, always contextualize what's in the resource with your actual conditions in your school and district. So some things to think about when you're developing your schedule with special education at the center. One is your continuum of services. What programs would you like to offer for students? You want to think about This is especially helpful when it comes to addressing that next question, and that is about staffing. Innovative program options can actually open up a whole new world when it comes to how you allocate staff. That also can be connected to your related services. Similar to that staffing note, could you reimagine when, where, and how related services are provided to students? So for example, could you have your speech language pathologist push into a class? How could you leverage that opportunity to also build teacher knowledge and skill of strategies for supporting that student? So remember, like I would say a key thing to remember is that innovation is really important here and all things to consider. There are also going to be those services that need their own private space. You want to have that in mind as well. If you can reimagine where the delivery of certain related services can happen, now you may actually find that you're freeing up space, which I know is a hot commodity in the school, for those services that need to have a designated location. But again, the more you can expand, or you'll hear us use the word reimagine a lot because that is the world that we live in, the more you can reimagine where, when, and how programming needs are met and where services are provided, you'll start to find more pathways to actually meeting the needs and allocating staff. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah. And another thing also to point out in this is just that where you're pulling students out of is also something that you might want to consider. And so I know some districts and states have regulations or requirements about what you can and can't pull students from in order to provide special education services, but we also want to sort of not caution, but we want to suggest that those decisions should be intentional, because pulling students from core content instruction without alignment between what's happening with the special educator and what's happening with the general educator can be really disruptive for a child. And then the child becomes further behind because they're missing the grade level content. And so that's a balance, because you also don't want a child sitting in a classroom not able to access the grade level content because there's a deficit there. So I think that's really the challenge and something that should be discussed and considered as you're doing this piece of the work.
And then you have other factors. This includes some schools, some districts have designated professional development days. So if you know every Wednesday you have student release at 1 o'clock, you want to definitely account for that so that you're not building out these full schedules, especially when it comes to things like related services or specials, things like that. You want to make sure that you haven't lost time once you have to factor in things like professional development days. Co-planning between teachers, going back to the opening conversation we had around like what prompted this, the need is very significant for educators to collaborate, for related service providers to collaborate. And so you want to make sure that you're thinking of where that space lives. That also still connects with any contract requirements or anything like that to ensure that you are not compromising protected time, but balancing that with collaborative time that educators can have. Once you have all of these puzzle pieces, these are all a whole bunch of puzzle pieces and your picture is kind of starting to become clear, you then need to put it all together. There are a number of pathways you can take for this. One is scheduling software. I'm not going to date myself with how scheduling looked when I first started, but it is very exciting to hear that there is scheduling software out there that your school or district can definitely purchase. Also, Excel and Google Sheets. I think like the world opened up for me when I understood that you could do a school schedule in Excel, and pivot tables became my best friend. There are definitely options out there. YouTube is a great resource when learning how to build pivot tables. Once you put all that information in, you tell it what you need, what you need the outcome to be, and blink, you have your school-wide schedule. Whiteboard. People may chuckle, they may laugh. I actually had a district level leader tell me, this was years ago, that every year when she went to sit down with principals to do a schedule, she was always told, like, we need more staff, we need more staff. And she said she went into the buildings and she had her anchor charts and her Post-its. And she had yet to have a year where when she walked out of a room, they weren't able to schedule every student and they had the staff. And so don't underestimate the power of a whiteboard or anchor charts and Post-its. It works. And then I'm sure there are countless other resources. Please, we encourage you, like, what are some other resources that your school uses or your district uses to create your school-wide schedules? Feel free to drop those in the chat. We are a community of learners here, and I'm sure folks will appreciate it.
Yeah, I see somebody talking about using schedules from other schools in the district potentially to sort of bounce ideas off of. I think that could be one that might gain you some insight. It also could confuse you if it doesn't make sense. So watch out.
Yeah. Scheduler, yeah, I've heard people use Scheduler. I have not used it myself. I said I'm an Excel schedule person, but definitely that is another software that districts use. And again, please continue to drop things into the chat. I'm sure folks appreciate it.
And I think this goes back to, just to sort of circle back to the beginning, Kristen, when you were talking about the iterating, like, there's no pen on this list, right? Like, this is the process, right? As you're doing this, you're continuing to go back to those non-negotiables, and then you're going back to making sure that all of the IEP goals, all of the IEP services are met. And then you're going to make sure that every kid is getting the class and the credits that they need. And you may have to go back through some of those things over and over again, and then check the non-negotiables again and say, like, oh, wait a minute, now we don't have enough time to do our new literacy curriculum. But that's the point of this. And obviously, like, no one has infinite amounts of time to do this. But this is, like, when we say that this is a very central part of making sure that your staff has the time that they need to do their work, like, it's critical. We were just talking to a group, and, we were talking about roles and responsibilities. And one of the women said, well, this is what I should be doing, but what I really want to be doing is planning. And that led us down a whole nother conversation about, like, well, where does planning fit in to all of this? And some contracts require planning periods, but how many times do we actually get to plan during the planning periods? That could be a non-negotiable, right? So these things are all part of the discussion, but you can't do everything. And so it is also that process of whittling down the vision, and then continuing to iterate until you get to a place where something is really working for most of your students. Questions, thoughts, ideas, challenges? Anyone have any issues to raise?
I'm gonna just ask, where do interventions come in? It's a good one. Okay, so I spoke about this a little bit earlier when talking about setting out your priorities and non-negotiables and setting up an intervention block. Honestly, that's going to be a huge piece. I've seen some schedules where interventions are kind of built into existing larger blocks of a schedule. It seems very complex, and something when it comes to scheduling, I think as simple as you can keep it, it'll be more sustainable for staff and for students. And so I would say the best piece of advice there is letting your intervention block be a non-negotiable, being very clear about what that is, the frequency of it, and putting that right in the core non-negotiables from the time that you start designing your framework for your schedule.
And Kristen, will you talk a little bit about, this is my own editorializing here with the question. I think it's a really good question. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about your experience with like how you do that in the context of like a shorter intervention cycle. Like knowing that kids are going to get different interventions for shorter periods of time. And usually you're making a schedule that's like a year or a semester.
Yeah, sure. So I can actually talk about that from a high school lens and then from like a K-8 lens. So high school, I don't want to say it's easier, but high school students tend to change schedules, or at least some courses, every semester, if not every quarter. And so you have a bit more flexibility with if a student is receiving intervention in their schedule, even if it's for a semester, that interventionist or the teacher who is leading that intervention class then can address like progress monitoring within that semester. And so you understand, like, I can actually move students through levels, a few intervention cycles in a semester. When it comes to the K-8 space, how I've seen that work out is actually for schools to approach it at a grade level. So I've seen where like second grade will have their intervention period at the same time. And every 6 to 8 weeks, they had a set calendar for progress monitoring. Every 6 to 8 weeks, the entire second grade team was administering their progress monitoring benchmark to identify where students were and if they needed to adjust their groupings. And then students could move groups. But because that intervention period is the same, they were now moving them across their necessary groups. So those are two ways I've seen it play out that both seem to work really well for those school contexts. Whew. Scheduling is fun. I'm probably like you once you get it, it's like this beautiful dance that that just really works. It's just learning all the steps at the beginning that can be a little interesting.
I see a question here. Who do you recommend is involved in the scheduling process? That's an interesting one.
That's a very interesting one. I'm smiling.
I can start answering while you're thinking. Which is that in the tool, the reason that we added that like data to be collected piece is because not everybody has to have their hands in the actual scheduling process, but you may want to hear from people and gather the information up front so that you have multiple voices that are clear in the process, right? And so thinking about, I would say thinking about two different stakeholder groups, for lack of a better term. One is like, what are the voices that we need to make sure we're listening to as we go through this process, making sure student voice is there. You know, maybe there's some family voice that needs to be part of that process. But then there's also like the nitty gritty of getting the Excel spreadsheet and like putting the pieces together. Like I would venture to say a smaller group is probably better, but a group that has the ability to change things, because you might need to change where classes are located or bell schedules or other things that are harder to do. I don't know if that answers the question or not, but that's my stab. That's my.
Yeah, I appreciate adding the layer about students and families, because I think that can be hard to consider when you are like in the thick of creating a school schedule, is to actually pause and think about, if I just even consider, actually it's a span K-12, you know, are your students more engaged in reading content in the morning? That's important to know. is it better to give them a math block right after lunch because they can move into manipulatives and things like that, and they have any? Those are all questions to really think about and ask questions about to families, to students. That can be really helpful, and we might not readily think about.
Mhm.
So we're almost at time. Look like questions have slowed down a bit, but if you have any, please feel free to continue to add them and we'll address them. But we want to also give you a reminder to carry with you and then tell you a bit about what's coming from ABC. Right up there with like putting the draft, revise, review, repeat on a t-shirt. I feel like I could also put this on a t-shirt, but just remember that creating a school schedule is an iterative process. Be patient with yourself. Be okay with revising as you go. You got this. And we thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We know 4:30 in the middle of the week can be tough, but thank you for engaging. You asked some great questions. Again, please continue to ask them in the chat or the Q&A if you have them, and we will we'll address them. But I'm going to send it over to Sarah to tell us what we have coming up.
All right. So next month is a very exciting. We have been working on our framework for special education quality. We need a new name. So if anyone's good at naming things, let us know. But we've been working on this since the very beginning of the Ability Challenge. And essentially it's in response to not seeing in the field a shared vision for what a high quality special education program at a school level that is inclusive looks like. And so we did the research to build that. And we have identified 16 indicators for a whole school approach to essentially improving special education and putting the most marginalized students at the center of our work. And we're going to roll it out next month. And we've already been using it. It's super exciting. And it's a very proud moment for me as someone who's been working on this for a long time. It's not perfect, but it's really good. And we're excited about getting it out and learning from all of you about what resonates, and really building on that work as we continue to build out our supports in the field. So that's what's on for next month. Expect the blog and tool in early April, and then we'll do the office hours. The goal is to do them the last Wednesdays of each month. We do want to know if 4:30 or 10:30 or 10 o'clock is better for you. So let us know in the chat if you have a preference. And I would say also a reminder that if you want to access the tool and the blog there on our website, just scroll down until you find the blogs. Yep.
10:30 a.m., not p.m.
Yep. Eastern Standard Time.
Thank you for asking that.
We also recommend signing up for our newsletter so that you will be alerted when this information comes out. And the last plug is, well, we have two last plugs. One is share your feedback with us. We're going to drop the link in the chat to our feedback tool. It's super quick. But we look at it and we use it to help us design everything. So we want to hear from you. That's the first one. And the second one, what was it? Oh, tell your friends. Anyone that you think might be interested in meeting us or learning what we're working on. We want to hear from you. Kristen and I spend a lot of time discussing the virtues of school improvement and how we can make our schools better. And so we get a kick out of meeting people who are similarly minded. So those are the last plugs. And thank you again for joining us. We're thrilled to have you.
Have a great afternoon.